be doing some reviews, and I bagged an interview with the director of The Lobster, Yorgos Lanthimos, so we'll be showing you a bit of that. But how about we crack on with movie news then?
The budget happened yesterday, 2 days ago, and there's some slight film news on that, in that they increased and decipher this as much as you can. The eligible expenditure for productions to 70 million. No one knows what that means, no one knows where that money goes, but it's a thing that's happening.
It's the cap on eligible expenditure to 70 million, so often the government will subsidise film productions that come and shoot here, so they've increased the amount of money that you can get for doing that, basically, which, I know, it seems to be a smart move that, there are more and more foreign productions, big productions, big money. They had Star Wars coming in last year.
Once they saw that Disney and HBO money, I'm sure they just went, well, let's just get more. No more Irish accents, enough of that.
No, but how Game of Thrones was going to film in the Republic, but they asked for a lot of money, like tens of millions in subsidies, and because this was the year of the bailout, the government kind of decided, that wouldn't look too good if we were throwing money at that, so they said no, and of course now they're kicking themselves because Northern Ireland have had a lot of success out of it.
So goddamn Game of Thrones exhibition up there, you do have to wonder if they saw the Penny Dreadful thing coming along and like, can we make this into Game of Thrones? They won't, because that show just isn't on that scale, but...
Of course, the UK introduced a similar thing where they were increasing the funding allowable for productions, and we were worried in the Irish film industry that, oh no, all the productions are going to go to the UK now. But what happened when the UK introduced that is they became oversubscribed. All their studios are being used, so there was spillover into Ireland. Hence, we have Vikings and Penny Dreadful and Ripper Street.
Well, yeah, because what happened in England was that every major American production started filming there. Like, I think most of the last few Marvel movies all shot there. The reason Penny Dreadful came to Ireland was because Age of Ultron had all the studios based in England at that point. That's the reason they came here. I mean, they can say their crap of, but Ireland looks like Victorian England so much better than England does. No, they came here because Age of Ultron sold all of their studio space.
But also, we have a lot to offer as a filming location. So, anyway, the Irish Film Board budget is remaining at €11.2 million. That's its capital budget, and the administration budget is €2.7 million or thereabouts.
So where does the 70 million come in?
70 million is for productions coming in, and that's how much money is allowable for in terms of a subsidy going towards the film. Unless I've explained that wrong.
We aren't accountants, and we don't know what these figures mean, but they sound good and they sound positive. So
what it is it's a sign of confidence in the Irish film industry during a budget when lots of other cuts and stuff are happening, because there's an election coming up, and it's been kind of, it's been a big guessing game. All the different sectors of society wondering how this budget's going to go. As far as the Irish Film Board is concerned, the response has been positive. This seems to be a show of confidence in the Irish film industry. So
there's so many people dying in the streets. There's people on the dole, but we could make Americans come here for tax rebates to make their movie.
Well, we all emigrate, and then 50 years from now, they'll make a movie about us emigrating. Like Brooklyn, that lovely film Brooklyn. But what other news is there?
Well, you had some news regarding a launch of women-related things in the country. That sounds like we're firing them into space.
The launch of women-related things. Yeah, no, I have an interest in women-related things, but this in particular is Women in Film and Television, which is an international organisation that seeks to redress the huge gender imbalance in the film industry. There is now an Irish chapter that launched this month, and just looking at their website here, they're saying that they need to ensure unconscious bias is eliminated in hiring practice. There needs to be equal opportunities for women. They're going to be researching the sort of environment for women entering the film industry, and and just looking at some of their figures,
you can't enforce a lack of unconscious bias without enforcing conscious bias.
How do you mean?
No, never mind, keep going. My mind kind of turned around that phrase.
I think if there is an unconscious bias, you kind of challenge it. It's like, if women are half of society, why is all the funding for projects and all the jobs, and even just all the well-written roles for bias. Often it isn't, though. It's just like, you just assume... we're going to be reviewing Sicario later.
Welcome back to Semantic Debates on the Film Ireland podcast.
We're going to be reviewing Sicario later, which is an American thriller starring Emily Blunt, and allegedly some financiers of the movie were offering them more money to make the movie if Emily Blunt's character was changed to a man rather than a woman. Jennifer Lawrence actually this week published an essay talking about how much less she is paid than her male counterparts in Hollywood. Women in film and television in Ireland in particular, they're talking about a director called Pat Murphy. She is...
I've heard of her, yes.
Yeah, so like even Richard has heard of her. And
Yeah,
she
sorry,
is
from the FI one.
very talented director. She directed Nora, which was a biopic of Nora Barnacle and James Joyce. She directed movies in the 80s, Maeve and Anne Devlin. And that's it. She's only directed 3 movies. She has a documentary out this month called Tanabana, but apparently she is the only Irish female director to have directed 3 feature films. I was surprised by that. Maybe I shouldn't have been, but it's like
I'm not actually, no.
that is depressing. But so I mean, it's a big thing to challenge, but it's worth challenging. Fair play to Women in Film and Television Ireland.
Yeah,
that chapter is now open. They're going to be. What they're basically going to be doing, what this means is they'll be hosting masterclasses and networking events. They'll be researching kind of gender discrepancy in the film industry and stuff. And I think it's about time we had something like this. They were but they're talking about like.
I had the mental image of people researching gender inequality, where just kind of looking at a big spreadsheet and going, "It is there," and that's it. That's like what you say. It's there.
Some people have unconscious bias, and they were even talking about how in Sweden their film board has introduced quotas that a certain amount of their funding will have to go to projects with female writers, directors, or producers, and I'm okay with that as long as the quota is 50-50. I think there's no reason why they couldn't make it 50-50 and just have it split up. And because I don't know, like how many like male directors will make boring shit movies, but they'll still get hired to do something else. Whereas if a woman makes a bad movie, they kind of like they find it much harder. Like you just think of a female director and type her into IMDb. A lot of them have huge gaps in their career in terms of making movies, while really bland, mediocre male directors go on. So I don't think, because I mean, like people would be say, oh, but they should get it on merit. Not well, there are loads of guys who are still getting work, and it's not on merit. It's because there is a bias towards having more men in the film industry, and I think in Irish cinema,
unconscious or conscious bias, would you say?
Whichever, it's still bad because it still hurts the quality of Irish cinema. I think a lot of the recent Irish movies, a lot of recent ones that have been better Irish movies have had female directors or writers or female-centric stories. So,
Perhaps.
fair play to them, I think. Let's see where they go with this.
Well,
We might have someone on to talk about it at some point, maybe.
Who knows, hopefully. In further budgetary news, so there was a bit of a leak during the week, and no one has fully confirmed this particular number, but allegedly we now have the rough budget for Marvel's The Avengers Infinity War Parts 1 and 2. Collectively, these 2 films are going to cost, and pause for effect, cue up the Austin Powers thing, and raise your pinky finger to your mouth, $1 billion.
What?
Which...
No! It could not be that much.
That sounds like a lot. I think now the question is, does that include marketing budget? If that includes the marketing budget, that's not...
And distribution and like everything. Because
when you say marketing, you include distribution. But yeah, it's not that high if you include that. If that's simply the budget, that is insane. Because that means the usual rule is you spend as much on marketing as you do on the budget. That means it's going to cost $2 billion?
But by way of contrast, the 3 Hobbit movies collectively they cost about 500 million.
Well, the difference I'd say there is that started off as 1 movie, then became 2 movies, then became 3 movies. So they were kind of shooting 1 big movie there, that kind of expanded out. It's like that's not really.
This is 2 big movies, though.
Yeah, but they're going in knowing it's 2 movies. Hobbit went in as 1 movie, or at least 2, not 3. But now, where the figures get really funny, I think, is allegedly 400 million, which I assume is for both films, goes to directors, actors, producers, etc. Which I assume means 600 million for what? Marketing and post? Or is post included in the 400? Anyway, the point is, of that 400 million, Robert Downey Jr. gets a certain amount of it.
I heard somewhere his contract said he'd get 50 million, right?
I'm pretty sure that was the first Avengers movie. I think he got 50 million either for his contract or because he got, I think it was 5%. When they're doing Iron Man 1, he somehow got in his contract that he gets 5% of the Avengers gross. Because at that point, no one knew what the Avengers was, no one thought it would be successful, so Marvel were kind of trying to fire him immediately once they found out how big Avengers got. So he got something in the region of 50 million for that. But no, for Infinity War Parts 1 and 2, his salary is $200 million.
No, feck off. that is not right. That cannot. There is no human who is worth. I wouldn't pay Nelson Mandela or like an idol who did wonderful things for humanity. They don't deserve $200 million of personal wealth. That is it. It's Robert Downey Jr. Like he's.
If it comes out
He's
that,
fine,
that he gives
but
away
he's not-
all of it immediately, I will say fair enough. If he's just basically taking Disney's money and handing it out to other people, that's okay.
He seems like the kind of guy who is either trying to build a real life Iron Man suit, or maybe he's just buying an island somewhere so he can have his own country. He seems like the kind of eccentric who would
I'd move
want
down
that much
country.
money.
If he has his own country, I'd totally apply for a visa to that.
This here is down a country. It's like, yeah, that could be a whole premise for a movie in itself. A crazy actor who gets paid way too much money and sets up their own country.
But I mean, I
Their own
think
island
like
nation.
500 million per movie doesn't seem like that much. I mean, maybe I'm just jaded because I've seen too many budgets of late, but that doesn't sound like that much. Like, for comparison, upcoming Bond film Spectre, which I'm very excited for, allegedly cost in the region of... Now, Skyfall, I think, cost something like 150... And Common Souls was 200 million.
150 is a lot, but I can buy that. For like a
I think
Bond
Age
movie
of
on that
Ultron was
scale.
250.
It's just like, again, that's kind of, you see, 250 is what I would have thought would be the uppermost scale of what a Hollywood movie
What was
would
Avatar?
cost. Avatar, good question. I think that was around 250, maybe 300.
That was almost 10 years ago at this point. That was in production for a long time.
It was like 6 or 7 years ago. Oh yeah, and that was a very long production time as well.
so
It was like they started writing it in 2004, hence the whole Iraq War stuff. And by the time it comes out, it's actually America just moved on.
I suppose so, just in for inflation, that probably cost somewhere in the region of 300 million. But anyway, so Age of Ultron cost 250 million. Quantum of Solace cost, I think, 200. Skyfall down 180. Spectre allegedly is somewhere in the region of 300 million. And here's...
What is wrong with the world? That's too much to be spending on a movie. That's
Yeah, as people pointed out, that makes it one of the most expensive films ever made. That doesn't inherently bug me. Like, as a massive Bond fan, I don't mind the idea of that, like a budget of a small country being spent on the movie. But what I don't understand is where did that money go? Because like I've seen the trailers, I've watched them a bazillion times at this point, and it looks great. Like it looks like they spent a lot of money on it, definitely. But I don't understand how they spent that much money on it. Now I can only assume their emphasis on practical over CGI effects-wise, maybe that pushed it into that level, because I intentionally have been avoiding reading much about this movie, but when the Sony hacks happened, this is when all this came to light. There is something about a final action scene involving a train derailment that Barbara Broccoli wanted them to use like 13 carriages, and they're like, can we just use 10 and save ourselves several million? So, no, use 13, and that's where all the debates came from, that's how the budget got leaked, and whatnot. So I can only assume all of that money went on practical effects. Like, look at the trailers, yeah, there's some Aston Martins being crashed into and planes going through buildings, and if they just didn't know what CGI was, maybe it cost half. Is that what they're saying? Like,
but does it look better with practical?
Oh, it absolutely does. Like, I want to see it in IMAX.
Also,
day one,
often
but-
it becomes much of a muchness. Like to make a sweeping statement like a CGI is more expensive or CGI is cheaper. Some practical effects might actually be surprisingly simple to shoot, and they just look
definitely,
better.
yeah.
But others would be more expensive.
But I can only assume this is some kind of pride thing. Because in a post-Die Another Day world, I can only assume they went, look, no more CGI ever unless we have to do it.
Oh.
So that's why Spectre looks like it's
Pierce
all practical all
Brosnan,
the time.
Pierce Brosnan surfing along waves in the Arctic as the giant space laser
Parachute
melts the
surfing,
ice
yeah,
cap.
from a giant-
Yeah, check out that movie. Jeez, that,
It's
that
about
was
this,
a while
like,
ago.
you've seen the Spectre trailer, there's a one shot near the start which looks really CGI, and I don't... Anyway, so... Budgets. In related Spectre news, Daniel Craig, over the last 2 weeks, during what is no doubt a very punishing press junket schedule,
It's the equivalent of Mads Mikkelsen with a rope, just whacking him tight to a chair.
Essentially.
Casino Royale reference, but
I think it
that's
was
the
that.
equivalent. This junket he's doing for Spectre. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
so initially his reaction seemed to be, every time he got asked the question, oh, are you going to keep doing Bond? Who do you want to do Bond instead of you? Who's next? Blah, blah, blah. And his reaction was somewhere along the lines of, I'll keep doing it as long as I physically can. And then within a week it was, but if you ask me right now, I would rather slit my own wrists than do another one. So, you know what, Daniel Craig, I like your honesty and your bipolar nature and your big potato head.
Do you think it's possible he was being sarcastic in the
I
interview?
have to assume so, because it was one of those clickbaity headlines, and Daniel Craig says he'll slit his own wrist and do another Bond film.
Okay, so he's being sarcastic. Here's my next question. Given that we live in a world where, clickbait is what journalism aspires to, and, just trying to get people worked up
I
with the
wouldn't say
latest
aspires
controversy.
to, I'd say sank into.
sank into. Actually, you're right. But how did he's a smart guy. He must have known like that would
Of course he did.
create trouble. And but you had a theory being.
It's not a theory. This is how press junkets work. I mean, you need your sound bites. You need something to get it. That's why there's how many hundreds of hours of journalists recording interviews with these people exist, and how much do you see? Maybe 20 minutes worth. What are those 20 minutes? Those 20 minutes are people saying something stupid, like in the Age of Ultron press junket when Chris Evans and Jeremy Hawkeye Renner.
Jeremy Hawkeye Renner. He changed his name legally.
Jeremy Renner, yes. Said that thing about Scarlett Johansson. What was it? There was something. Oh, they called her a whore, like jokingly. Remember? Cause
Oh, she's such a whore.
no,
that kind of thing. It's like
no. Some
blatantly,
interviewer
like,
asked them, but she's going out with the Hulk, and then she also was with Hawkeye in the comics, and is there jealousy that what a whore she is, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
It was meant in jest. The people all naturally went.
and take it out.
Tumblr.
So it's like I imagine with this, I think his choice, Daniel Craig's choice of words, "slit my own wrists." If people are sensitive about suicide, did he get into any trouble over that? Or
Not that I'm aware of. But I mean, if you've seen enough interviews with Daniel Craig, which I have, like he seems like the kind of guy that he's a rowdy man. He seems like he'd get into a bar fight if he had to. I can imagine him saying that, and I can imagine the tone of voice he'd say it in, and it's funny and it's fine, and people are. I don't blame him because he has one more in his contract. After Skyfall, he signed on for 2 more, and yet people are constantly asking him, "Who's next? When are you quitting? Are you dead yet? How old are you? Are you too old?"
yeah.
Like I want to still my own.
So basically, at this point, because a week earlier he was quoted as saying, "I'd like to keep playing Bond for as long as possible," but then a week later, you think he got worn out doing the same interview over and over again. So he says that, but you think any publicity is good publicity. He said that knowing that.
Well, the point is, we're not talking about it. The headlines are still rolling about it. Spectre is still in the public consciousness.
Okay, but was that just an absent-minded joke of his, or did he know that? Look, there needs to be some other talking point about Spectre, and the studio is happy with that. And
I think it was mainly absent-minded comment, but at the same time, if the publicists didn't want to get out, they wouldn't let it get out. Like they have control of those interviews. Like they could easily say, "Don't print that" or whatever, but they didn't care because it gets them more attention.
Well, I would say this is a cynical world we're living in. If this next story didn't give me some cause for hope, we had this year in America a movie about Stonewall depicting the Stonewall riots that birthed the LGBT rights movements in North America, directed by Roland Emmerich, usually known for acting out his childhood pathology to destroy monuments because he hates buildings, so he makes all the big disaster movies where he blows stuff up. But a pet project of his for a long time has been to make a movie about Stonewall as a gay man. This was a project kind of close to him for years. He wanted to do the story justice, but he ends up making a movie where Jeremy Irvine from Warhorse plays like a small town white boy who's bullied in his school for being gay and then moves to New York City, and it's a very kind of archetypal story that's like old hat, and he's basically the one we see the Stonewall thing happen through. And this movie has faced a lot of criticism because LGBT people were seeing the movie or even just seeing trailers of it. It depicts this composite character as throwing the first brick that incites the riot when there are reports about it being a trans woman of colour or and just in general that trans people, sex workers, people of colour, all these kind of people who are marginalised anyway, they were the ones who kind of started this riot, which started this movement, which now in our modern world has become very well. Of course, like it's LGBT equality is acceptable now, but the criticism of the criticism of this movie though is that it was whitewashing history. It was taking
like
a very
every movie ever.
But taking a very boring main character at the expense of telling about the more interesting real people, and then it has the gall to end the movie by saying this movie is dedicated to the unsung heroes of Stonewall, and you're just like, well, you could have sung about them in the movie you just made. And the screenwriter, it was also a gay man. He wrote a kind of kind of apology on Facebook that didn't really address the criticisms. And what ended up happening, to everyone's surprise, is that the movie bombed when it opened in America. And I think people were hoping it would bomb, but they didn't expect it would bomb that much. And they basically, there was a Venn diagram that explained this very well, that basically people who wouldn't see this movie would be people who are still outright homophobic and transphobic, people who don't like boring movies with like generic characters, and people who don't like movies that skew history. And just in that middle section of this Venn diagram, that's the audience Stonewall is left with. So Very few people went to see it, and I think for once, though, I think just people felt like the community this movie is depicting didn't feel it represented them, and
Yeah, but the studio wants
so they stayed away, and mainstream audiences stayed away. But like,
the takeaway from this is going to be that you can't make a movie about gay stuff; it won't sell tickets. That's what the takeaway is going to be. It has nothing to do with the history that we.
You see, I thought this would be a nice, positive story about like audiences aren't tolerating like subpar
it is
filmmaking.
positive, but that won't be the studios.
That's what the
aren't
studios will
humans.
think.
They're weird robotic machines that live off money.
Yeah, because I mean, there's lots of other stories about like gay and trans history that should be told, but you're saying they maybe won't now because they saw Stonewall.
I think it'll be harder. I think it'll be more challenge to get those movies made.
Let's hope the Danish Girl does well then with Eddie Redmayne. That's going to be out in a few months.
Well, that'll be fine because he's an Oscar winner now. People like him. That'll be okay. Even though there'll be the obvious complaints of why not get a trans woman to play her.
Yeah.
But
but
same as Leto with Dallas Buyers Club. But
well,
just
maybe
to demonstrate
we're getting there,
studio ignorance and bring it back to Marvel for a second, there was another story I just remembered now, like last week, 2 weeks ago. So Age of Ultron cost whatever, $250 million to make. It's including marketing there, double the price of $500 million. The first Avengers made $1.5 billion. Age of Ultron made 1.3, 1.4, I think. And Disney announced that they're considering it a financial failure. It made over $1 billion on a budget of at most $500 million, and it is a financial failure because it didn't manage to make all of the money again the first one did, and more.
I'm scanning my brain now. I'm thinking of all the Disney films I watched growing up. Was there ever like a character who was greedy and learns the error of their ways for like caring too much about money or something? Because this is just you're not happy because it made less than the first movie. Even though it was like almost identical, is like 90% or so of.
And don't forget like merchandising and Blu-ray and DVD sales. That was just box office. That's not including merchandising or any of the advertising revenue or product placement. Of which there was a lot.
Oh, Disney! Maybe Disney will announce we're cancelling all our current projects. We're going to be making small indie movies from now on that are heartwarming.
That or they'll cancel everything and put all of their collective budget into Infinity War. So it'll be a 5-hour each, 10-hour long, 5-year, everlasting. Oh, so much money.
This is kind of film industry is just
so hang on. If they're pumping in $1 billion into Infinity War, how much does that need to make to be a financial equivalent of success? $3 billion?
Oh, maybe it definitely has to. Okay, definitely more than Avengers 1. More than Titanic, which was 1.8 billion, and Avatar is the record holder at 2.9 billion. So I think I think they want to.
I knew it was 2. It was 3.
Yeah. So that's Avatar's most highest grossing film ever. It was most pirated film ever. Name the main character.
Josh.
Jake. Close enough.
Okay.
Then name the female lead, the Na'vi woman he falls in love with.
Zoe Saldana.
Yeah, that's the actor's name. Well, what's her character's name? What's the villain's name?
Zoe Saldana?
It's amazing how many people saw that movie, but how forgettable so much of it was.
No,
Even though it was visually amazing, well, it was just
It was okay. I
no
like when the giant robot had a giant knife. That was pretty good.
Oh yeah, that was class. But in general though, kind of this is kind of the thing. They're making these big blockbusters, huge budgets, huge box office takes, but
where's the heart?
Are we believing anymore? As Martin Scorsese said, I don't think it's a believing anymore. Oh, the way he says it, just something to think about anyway. Like this seems to be the direction the film industry is going in. Steven Spielberg.
It's always been the way it went.
Steven Spielberg thinks it's a bubble close to bursting though. Like he said that last year, and everyone panicked like, "Oh my God, Spielberg said it!" But
Spielberg, the most relevant filmmaker, still working.
I will not hear a word against him.
He was okay. He's been very boring the last few years.
Cease your mouth moving.
Yeah. And now we have a quick interview with the director of The Lobster by our own Jonathan Victory.
Have you thought of what animal you'd like to be if you end up alone?
Yes, a lobster.
A lobster is an excellent choice.
You did get a very strong cast together for the movie. Like even aside from the lead actors, the whole ensemble is really strong. I could spend the rest of the interview just talking about specific actors, and I'm just wondering how you and the casting director going about making sure the entire cast is strong, and like, was it down to the strength of the script in your previous films that a lot of people were drawn to it, or did you have a brief for the casting director in terms of specific people to approach, or?
No, it's hard for me to have a specific brief because when we write the screenplays, there's not even very detailed descriptions of the character. So we barely mention the age, or
they rarely have names either.
Yeah, they rarely have names. This time around they did, but yeah. So I try to leave it as open as possible because I want to be free afterwards, after I've completed the screenplay, to just think of people that I'd like to work with and see if they can somehow fit within this world that we're creating, and then figure out the chemistry between them. So I try to leave it as open as possible. And for me, it's just, finding people again instinctively that I feel are right for the part, and they, one choice from the other might be completely different. So it's hard to have like a general brief about this character because, I might like this actor and then I might like an actor who's like 20 years older and bald and whatever. And so it's really hard. And yeah, the process we followed was, think of people that I'd love to work with, find a way of figure out their place in the film, and yeah, I was fortunate enough to have a body of work before was relatively known to them, and yeah, giving them the script, it was very straightforward to get the people that were interested in be part of this film. Surprisingly easy, actually.
Well, in terms of building chemistry between the actors, would that come in during the audition process, or is that once you have a good actor cast for a role, they're gonna make it work? Or?
Yeah, it's just the idea you have about them. So and because most of them, we couldn't bring them together and try them out to see if there was chemistry. You just you have a lot of. For most of these actors, you have so many samples of work that you can just figure out whether something works or not. And I also like to, when I'm thinking of casting an actor, I watch a lot of their interviews and see pictures online and stuff, so to see them in other things other than being in a role in a film, just to see how a different aspect of them. So I make sure that I have enough information for me to be able to make that decision.
I do like how weird the movie is in a consistent way. I mean, you could look at another director like David Lynch, and his movies are weird, but they're quite surreal, and they'll go from one thing to another. But the world this movie is set in has an internal logic to it, or like it's strange, but it has a consistency throughout. I was just wondering, is in approaching the screenplay and then filming it, is there a way to maintain that consistency, or is it just by trusting kind of the story you're telling?
Yeah, I think we strive to have that from the beginning, and it's also the way we know how to progress. From the moment we have an idea, much of it then evolves with logic. Just we try to get into the logic of the world and the characters, so everything springs from that, and it's just not ideas from wherever, or the unconscious or subconscious, or so much of it, after you have an initial structure, it's just logic. Is what would if these people that created this system, so what would they do about this thing, what would they do about that thing, what can the character do, to leave from this point and go to the other point. And so it's just because it is based on logic, no matter how absurd the world might be or the rules, then because it's based on logic, I think there's a certain consistency.
Yeah, as if you can, the rules of the universe can be as weird as you want them to be, as long as you don't break the rules.
Yeah, then you have to follow them.
Okay. No, but I mean, this world, the concept gets across very well with like two extremes that are contrasted, where the hotel demands companionship and the loners expressly forbid it. And I really found Léa Seydoux' character interesting when she was the leader of the loners' resistance, but they were taking to sort of trying to fight against the hotel and like committing acts of sabotage or terrorism or whatever you'd call it. But just the thing that struck me about that was that they're fighting against a society that has accepted this belief that single people will be turned into animals, and while they might sort of get some petty victories against the hotel, if all of society is kind of thinking about this, I was just wondering how could you, if one decided that it was wrong for single people to be turned into animals, what could you really do about it? And I was just thinking, like, say for example, like economic paradigms, you know, if all of societies accepted it, and this is very relevant to Greece and Ireland right now, I mean, is that kind of issue in terms of like society tolerates something that's actually quite weird and you don't want to be involved in it, is that another issue that was consciously coming up when you were thinking of this story?
Not consciously, but I understood, and that's why it was important for me to include the other side, the opposition, those people that would be opposed to how the world was organized and constructed. Obviously, that's, you know, creating a complete world obviously creates a political aspect of it as well. So that political aspect you can associate it with, you know, equivalents in real life outside the world that we've created in the film. So I was aware that, and that was one of the strengths of how we structured the film, that it does relate, and it makes the film political without it having to actually refer to anything political. And obviously, you know, the loners in the film are like any other smaller group that, you know, is trying to change things that might seem helpless, or, you know, again, in real life, I mean, there are those people that have different views and they are trying to somehow, with different, using different means to make them heard or somehow affect the norm, you know, what's around them.
Now, what also happens a lot in life with those kind of people is that they end up having extreme rules themselves.
Yeah.
So it does end up happening where it's the other extreme where you can't have any relationship at all. So it's kind of, so then I suppose the central relationships, you can call Farrell and Rachel Weisz's characters, where they fall in love and it's organic. It's not forced because there's a deadline, but at the same time it's against the rules of this other group they've joined. So I suppose it is about, you know, people like that who are trying to determine their own lives, but when they're dealing with these pervasive political influences, like, you know what hope is there for them?
Yeah, well, that's exactly what the film is
The
about.
ending is left open, I suppose. Although the sound of waves in the credits, like, is that supposed to be a kind of hint or not?
No, it's supposed to be as open as possible in order for different people to think of different things about it. Because, I mean, it is open, and we just try to include things like the sound in the credits that, again, are quite open. You know, it could be a memory, it could be, you know, the future, it could be anything. So I like it because I see, you know, when people talk about the ending, you know, you kind of, you can tell certain things about them, you know, and they can tell things about themselves, about how they have decided what happens in the end, or they're not decided, or you see if they're optimistic or pessimistic about life and love in general. And so I find that quite interesting.
I mean, the ending for me, I think it also spoke to an uncertainty that even if you do find a relationship where there is organic love, there's still a bit of uncertainty about it. You have self-doubt, you're questioning you know, the other person, you know, if they're coming back or not, or how they will. And, you know, so I suppose even in the situation where you do find a relationship, is there a kind of uncertainty and loneliness?
Yeah, and also the difficulty, because, I mean, also if he takes his eyes out and they can be together in that world, I mean, there's going to be difficulty, and, you know, these two blind people, you know, working around in that world, that would be difficult, and how can they survive that? So, you know, it's it's about trying to include, you know, every aspect of, you know, being in that kind of relationship, and trying to identify love and what you're prepared to do for it.
So, Richard, what did you think of my interview with the director of The Lobster, Yorgos Lanthimos?
It's okay. I like bits when you weren't talking.
Why am I still single? Anyway, will we do reviews?
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about The Lobster first.
It would seem poignant,
No, it would seem pointy.
prescient.
Yeah.
That's not the word. Words.
I think it's a
The
good
lobster
point.
is a word.
It's
the
a good-
film contains other words.
Yeah, okay, a film is a moving image where people talk and stuff. I think they probably know the basics of that, but I mean, what did you think of The Lobster as a film? This is, of course, the movie where it's set in a world where if you're single, you are sent to a hotel and you have 40 days to find a partner, and if you don't, you
I
are
want to
turned
stop you
into an
there.
animal.
Is that actually the plot? Are you sent there or do you volunteer to go there? Because I wasn't clear on that in the movie. I initially thought you volunteer to go there if you're just perpetually single. But then the way that society seems to be working, I was confused as to whether or not you were like forced to go there or volunteer to go
I think throughout the movie, there are police stopping people, asking to see their registration if they have an assigned partner. This is a dystopian world basically where I think people are forced to go to this hotel, and they are surgically transformed into an animal if they don't find a partner. So
Why
this is a
does
whole
that technology exists. Oh, go on.
it's a whole dark satire basically on modern dating.
Well, I still haven't seen the trailer for this. I'd heard the setup weeks ago and thought that sounds like a weird, quirky Wes Anderson style thing. And I'm wondering if the trailer depicts it as a comedy or a drama or what. Because I went into this thinking it'll be a kooky, quirky comedy with a little bit of like satire or darkness. And then that was certainly the first, 20 minutes. And it gets so much stranger than even that setup alone implies. Like, that's the first third of the movie probably. And then it takes another turn. And like Lea Seydoux character into it, and it keeps escalating in very weird and strange ways.
Lea Seydoux is fantastic because she just looks
I hate
evil
her.
all the time. No,
Oh, yeah, no, she was great. I
presence was
hated her
great.
character.
I think another thing to say about this movie, the cast is so strong. Like even all the minor characters, and I think a lot of movies they wouldn't think that through. They would just like, oh, we'll get some. They're not as important as like the main characters, but this is like a really great ensemble piece. I'd have to mention the whole cast to do it justice, but just like you have like Ashley Jensen and Olivia Colman and
Rachel
Basically
Weisz,
doing,
Ben Whishaw, Colin Farrell,
John C.
Lea
Riley.
Seydoux, John C. Reilly.
There's so many people in this movie.
Michael
It's a
Smiley.
very international cast, and
Someone from EastEnders, I think, was in there.
but it's set in this world where very few of the characters have names. They're called like Nosebleed Woman, or they're given,
I didn't even notice. That's a good point. Yeah,
or like short-sighted woman is Rachel Weisz's character's name, but they all have different accents. But they're all in this one hotel, shot in the west of Ireland in Kerry. So this is an Irish co-production, and they actually make pretty good use of Irish locations because it's not set in a specific place, but they make it. They have a good contrast between like futuristic-looking locations in Dublin, I assume somewhere near the Grand Canal, and the places in Kerry, Woods they're shooting in Kerry. It has a very international feel to it, and I suppose the subject matter, doesn't concern like one nation. It's, this sort of modern anxiety over dating is something we're all facing. I don't know, I think the movie works, but it is very weird throughout, and it is at least sort of consistently weird. The rules of the universe say consistent, but it is
I'm hard
strange.
to say if it does work, because I really enjoyed it. Like, it was so strange, but it felt like a weird sort of reverse YA dystopia, where, like, you have like your Hunger Games or your Divergent,
Yeah.
or you'd say Divergent.
Divergent, that's how I pronounce it, but...
Where it's always these adolescents in quite adult situations where the situation itself is a metaphor for high school, whereas this was more like actual adults in a high school scenario that was a metaphor for adult situations. And it was really weird, like it's all this high school nonsense of who's dating who, over the first half an hour anyway. And the whole hotel setup was so bizarre, and it feels like an endless kind of 1950s prom, and you have, what's her name again, the actress that played like the maitre d' of the hotel?
Olivia Colman from
right,
like
yes.
that Mitchell and Webb look and Peep Show and stuff, and she's great in
She's
this.
fantastic. She's terrifying. She's absolutely
Yeah.
terrifying, and I don't understand what she. The first half, like, who is she?
She runs
she's
a hotel.
Principal, yeah, she's
Yeah.
she runs a hotel, but she runs like a principal in some weird boarding school, and they have these like, weird displays on the stage where they demonstrate how women get raped if they're alone, but they don't if they're with someone.
Yeah.
But it's all played for laughs, and there was one bit where I couldn't stop laughing, and you actually turned to me and go, "That's not funny. Why are you laughing?" When a character attempts suicide, but it's such like a pathetic. I don't mean this like disparaging towards suicide. I mean it's like visually it's pathetic what happens. Like she's just lying on the ground bleeding and screaming, while another character sits staring at her for a solid minute, just sipping her tea. And the image is so incongruous and so bizarre, and the movie's tone is so all over the place.
It is a dark comedy, if we could make that clear. This might not be for everyone, but...
But it is definitely a comedy, and that's if I have one issue with it, and that's probably it. It's that Farrell's performance is deeply odd. Initially, I was
It's meant to be.
No, it is meant to be, and initially I was kind of bemused by it, but as it went on, I realised it wasn't going to end, that he was going to keep talking in this weird, stilted manner with these odd...
Mm-hmm.
He sounded like a bit like Dougal from Father Ted. That's what I couldn't stop thinking of. It sounded like Arlo Hanlon, but all of his dialogue felt like Black Books era Bernard Black improv, like bad improv. It's so
See,
weird.
all
I
the
don't understand
characters-
how this was written, how he was directed, how this was acted. It's
How it was written was that all these characters speak in a very stilted, matter-of-fact way. How it was
it
directed
doesn't
is
stand
that
out for anyone
it's
but
actually just
Farrell.
I thought Rachel Weisz's narration really stands out to me.
Oh, yeah,
She
the narration
talks
stands.
like this. It is a very strange speech pattern. Like
And every
it's-
time she does, the same like 10 seconds of music sting plays over it in a very Eyes Wide Shut-esque manner.
You see, I suppose, and just from talking to the director about it, he was just sort of saying it is about just this situation is so weird. It's just being very matter of fact about it. So that's why all the delivery of every line is so monotone, like even in very tense scenes. And I mean, it is bizarre nonsense, but the stakes are high. You're going to be turned into an animal in this horrible, messed up world you're in. So I think in a way it's kind of there is a lot of understatement for a scenario that's completely horrifying, and it definitely stands out. It's distinctive. I think it's worth seeing if you're of a certain mindset, I guess.
That's the thing, like, who is this for? Who would you recommend this to? I have no idea.
I think, you see, I think if you tell people, oh, it's about anxieties around modern dating, there's probably something in the movie for everyone.
yeah,
There's
it's
probably
definitely
one moment
that.
that will refer to someone, and some anxiety they have, whether they're in a relationship or outside a relationship, or they decide, oh, I'm just not going to date anyone, I'm just going to be alone. There's all this kind of stuff is addressed in the movie. There's even a bit early on where he's like asking, do I have to be in a heterosexual, option? Is there a bisexual or homosexual option? They tell him, sorry, the bisexual option was too complicated.
yeah.
So you have to pick homosexual or heterosexual. That's a kind of it's a short moment in the movie, but it's all about bi erasure and how bisexuality isn't treated seriously as a
Yeah,
sexual
the whole film is
orientation.
about binaries. Like, even there's a scene right after that one where he's getting his shoe size and he asks for, I think, 9.5, and they go, there's no half sizes. And like, even that
Yeah.
stuff further, everything has to be this binary choice. And
I think it's a really good movie. It's
Oh, it's
just
great.
weird.
It's great.
It's just yeah.
And it just, if you do like black comedy, the violence is so sudden and like flatly shot that is incredibly funny. There's a bit near the end, I won't say which character are which, but you probably recall it when someone gets hit by a rock in their sleep very suddenly. But this, like, the shot never changes. It's just this one flat static image of someone sleeping, someone else running by and bashing their skull in with a rock. And it's really funny. But it's really, I don't know why it's funny. Like, I find violence funny, I'll admit that. But it's this movie, like, that suicide scene should not have been funny, but it was so funny. You didn't think so, I know, but I haven't laughed that hard in a long time.
Disturbed man.
But yeah, no, I
So Colin Farrell's career is on the up, it seems. He's doing interesting work like this.
Well, I was going to bring that up. Yes, he's very good in The Lobster. I just think a lot of weird choices that he made in it. But another recent film, which I think is hopefully gone from cinemas by now, so it's not dirtying up the place. Solace, starring Anthony Hopkins and Colin Farrell.
Wow, so he's making a movie with Anthony Hopkins. I think, so this is like a reconnaissance for Colin Farrell, right? Because, he did his best in True Detective Season 2. He's in The Lobster now. Tell us about Solace. This is another great movie in his clean
Solace,
streak. Just tell us how bad it was.
Or as I choose to call it, Psychic Police. I've heard this rumor. Allegedly, there was talk 2 decades ago probably of a sequel to Seven being made. And I think the script was actually commissioned and written where Morgan Freeman's character from Seven would have gone on to solve further crimes, but he would have had psychic powers. This was obviously quite quickly shelved and ignored, and David Fincher
It's
probably
not
burnt out
alluded
his
to
studio.
in Seven at all. Oh, man.
He could have got hit in the head, you don't know, or eaten what's-her-face's head. And
With a rock or like
Okay,
I'm
anyway.
happy I interrupted you there because your theory was much more disgusting. Can we just move on and
It
talk
often
about
is.
Solace?
Anyway, so the rumor is that this is that script. They just changed the name, or the Seven Connection, and Anthony Hopkins is playing the Morgan Freeman character. So the basic plot is that Jeffrey Dean Morgan is a cop. He has a partner who is a lady cop. I forgot who she was or her name was. She was no one of note.
Great.
She's the main character, but I forgot about the character name, and I think maybe I took it down. In any case,
Is this a very memorable film, or
in some ways, yes. Let me try and get my cost together for the notes. Here we are. Yes. In any case, so they're hunting a serial killer who seems to know their every move. He seems to be 3 steps ahead of them. So they go to find retired Anthony Hopkins, who is a psych police, in his little house because his daughter died. She died of something that psychicness wouldn't help, leukemia or cancer or something. What's the base point?
that's a shame. Psychic powers can help you with so much, but like, that the illness, yeah.
That's where Man of Steel fell down. They should have had his father die of a heart attack, not in a tornado for no reason. Sorry. So anyway, they go to them. They go to Anthony Hopkins and get him to come in, and it becomes readily apparent that the serial killer they're hunting, who turns out to be Colin Farrell, who doesn't show up for the last half an hour for some reason, is also psychic. And the film is absolute nonsense. Anthony Hopkins is dreadful. I have not seen him this bad in many years. Like, I've always been a big fan of his non-committed Thor performances, where but it makes sense there, where he's meant to be this really old man. So yeah, sure, he's monotone and says nothing. In this film, he just potters around as if he didn't know what the script was, as if they hired him. He read through one draft of the script, thought, grand, I can do that. Came in on set and improv all of his dialogue. It's the worst, which is funny because Jeffrey Dean Morgan is really like giving it his all, which then makes sense about halfway through when he abruptly dies of cancer out of nowhere after being shot in the cancer, I guess. It's really unclear why he dies or how he dies. He gets shot in the middle of a police raid, and then the next scene dies of cancer, which you hadn't found out he had in that scene.
Right.
Well, Anthony Hopkins, who clearly shot his scenes with the death scene at a different point in time, probably a different room, so it looks non-committally towards the mid-range of the cameras.
At least tell me our national treasure Colin Farrell acquits himself from this.
He actually does. He's the best thing in it.
Okay.
It's annoying that he doesn't show up until the last half an hour, because once he shows up and him and Anthony Hopkins are having their psychic battles, which amounts to... It's not horrible. It basically amounts to Anthony Hopkins walking through car parks and lonely streets while Colin Farrell somehow projects images of alternate realities into his head. So like he'll walk through a car park and see 100 different Colin Farrells walking different directions. Kind of, him saying like, which one's the real one? Follow me, Anthony, whatever his name is, Bill or something. No, that wasn't it. It feels like they basically took several episodes of different TV shows and just stitched them together. Because every 20 minutes or so, it feels like it's going to end in a sort of, and like, coming up next week. But it just keeps going, and it's so weirdly structured and badly written. It's not, the writing isn't that bad. Hopkins is so dreadful.
Maybe there's a bunch of failed pilots and they stitched them together into this deformity, or...
That wouldn't surprise me, but if the seventh thing is true, it explains why there's so many incongruous 90s things. Like, there's all this weird sort of, what's the term I'm looking for? Again, sort of, it's so ones coming out, what's the name for when you're making jokes about how scary gayness is?
What? Is it like ironic homophobia?
No, like when... Because homophobia, being gay at one point is a plot point which is used to demonstrate to some really incredulous looking featured extras Anthony Hopkins' psychic powers. They're interviewing like a guy they've arrested as a murder suspect, and his alibi...
Oh, it's worse, he's gay!
No, his alibi doesn't stand up, and the way Anthony Hopkins demonstrates that he knows the alibi doesn't stand up, is oh, because you weren't really home that night, you were having an affair, weren't you? Yes, but not with a woman. There's all this sort of queer fear weirdness, and then AIDS gets mentioned a few times in a very straight... Like, no one mentions AIDS anymore.
Maybe this is a really old script for the 80s
That's
or 90s.
what I mean. If it is the 7 script, it makes sense. If it came from the 90s, it makes sense. Because the idea genuinely isn't bad, and once you get to the last 20 minutes, and Colin Farrell shows up and starts kind of playing it over, like he's a bit camp in it, but he's fun, and it's all like making Jesus poses. So in summary, don't go see Solace. Or do, it's terrible. Jonathan, you have seen good movies of late, have you not?
Yeah, well, the movie out recently, Suffragette, it portrays the suffragette movement for women's right to vote. You know what suffragettes were, but what I find odd is that this movie took so long to make. Like, am I forgetting some movies that have been about suffragettes that have been made, or...
Probably some indie movie made by a French man somewhere.
Yeah, because I was just thinking, like, for it to take a century to have... to take a century to have this kind of movie made about suffragettes called Suffragette. Yeah, I don't know. I just felt like that took a while. But you know, it does deal with historical characters, but it goes the route of having a composite character, which we spoke about earlier. Stonewall. You kind of need the audience point of view character to see all this stuff happening. So, I mean, but you have Meryl Streep playing Emmeline Pankhurst in it, who was a well-known suffragette. You could have just made the movie about her. There was another actor in this movie, Natalie Press. Do you know of her, Richard?
Do I?
Well, she played the lesbian lover of Emily Blunt in a art house movie 10 or 11 years ago called My Summer of Love. Emily Blunt has since gone on to be in Hollywood movies, and rightly so. Natalie Press has not, and that's a shame because she's a damn good actor, and in this movie she plays a suffragette very important in the history of the suffragette movement called Emily Davison. Now, if you know who she is, you will know that she does something incredibly badass and courageous for the suffragette movement. If you don't know who she is, I don't want to spoil it for the movie, in case you want to go see it. If you do go see it, they could have made the movie about Emily Davison or Emmeline Pankhurst. Instead, we follow Carey Mulligan's character, and I suppose the advantage of having a composite character in an historical movie like this is, you know, they can interact with the historical figures and all the important stuff can happen to one character. So you get the, like, riot police scene and the force feeding scene and so on. It just... I'm not sure it like, does justice to the movement. You could have had a better movie out of this. It's fine. It's probably what they're going to show you in history class when the teacher's hungover one day, but, I don't know, it wasn't... Yeah, I felt like it could have been a more badass movie, given how badass these women were. And,
Please stop calling them badass women. It's such an overused trope.
Yo. But, yeah, so, Suffragette, it is about an important topic, so I suppose go see it, but, you know, it's not going to be the most, groundbreaking or mind-blowing movie. It's not that an interesting look at the issue, which is a very interesting issue to look at, so I think I'm just saying it deserved a better movie. Very good movie, which showed at Sundance this year and was a big hit, was called Dope, and I loved this movie. I don't think it's out in the cinemas anymore. It was too short in the cinema. Not enough people saw it. It is a great...
Premise turned me off, so maybe that's what happened.
It's about these South Central Los Angeles teenagers who are nerds, they're outsiders. When through various mishaps there are drugs misplaced in their bags, no one suspects them of being involved in anything like that because they're such dorks, so they have to find a way to sell off the drugs. Imagine if The Wire or Breaking Bad or some such show was directed by Wes Anderson. You kind of get a sense. It works so well. It's great. It covers a lot of important issues around masculinity and race and pop culture and so on, and it's probably going to be in my top 10 best movies this year, if not my top 5, so you definitely should catch up on that if you haven't seen it yet.
Well, I won't. Moving on to Macbeth, which we'll very quickly talk about. Everyone knows the plot. Everyone knows in it. It's fine. It's pretty good. It looks really nice. The sound is great. Like, the soundtrack is great. Fassbender is fine. I still think, narratively, his descent into madness is way too fast, which it always is in that play. They don't really try and add any extra scenes to make it more satisfying. Cotillard is pretty good. She's brilliant for one scene for the solidifying of the church. That's fantastic. Highlight the movie. Rest of it's pretty grand. Jack Rayner is, as a friend of mine said, looks like a giant baby on a horse. He's an odd-looking man, and he doesn't get much to do, and his accent isn't very good, and yes.
You know, it's kind of... Yeah, as adaptations go, it's not the best one I've seen. Orson Welles did a better one. Roman Polanski did a better one. Even though a lot of the movie is very visually interesting, and it does these battle scenes, which are like Braveheart meets 300, and it possibly gives a new angle to the descent into madness, which is the idea that Macbeth is a soldier of post-traumatic stress disorder. Like, that's a possible way of reading it. Fassbender, even though it is like rushed as it usually is, though, he plays it very well. There are certain like moments of the play that adapt well, but on the whole, it's kind of bland. You know, it didn't really grab you the way it should have, and so that's a bit of a shame.
Another film we both had somewhat middling opinions on, American Ultra, written by Max Landis, directed by someone, I can't remember who, no one of note, and starring Kristen Stewart and
Jesse Eisenberg. The movie's not that notable either, though. No, it was about a stoner who is... finds out he's a kind of Jason Bourne. He's been brainwashed to forget he's an agent, but they want to then take him out. So it's then the hilarious situation where like you think he's just a skinny, lanky stoner and he's getting threatened. Then all of a sudden his adrenaline kicks in and he kills these guys. And then he's going, "Oh my god, I killed these guys." It's that kind of like comedy, action/comedy. I don't think either element works quite well, and they certainly don't get the balance right. There are like short bursts of comedy, and the rest of the movie is like super serious. It doesn't work.
I think the balance is fine. It's just the writing, and I kind of have this problem with Max Landis in general. I like his writing and his humor in theory, but it doesn't really work out that well here. It's trying to be both, in my mind, the two films like I'm thinking of are Kick-Ass and Burn After Reading. And it's not as good as either of those. I know you hate Burn After Reading. It's not as good as either of those movies. Like, the CIA stuff is funny, probably the funniest bit of the movie, but it's still not that funny. And the ultra-violence is nowhere near as good as Kick-Ass. I feel like if someone like Matthew Vaughn, or James Gunn had directed this, it could have been a lot better. My other issue is that I feel like what they should have done was, because you get a kind of coda at the end of the movie where it shows Stewart and Eisenberg on a mission where he's like accepted his fate as an agent.
Oh, we're so sorry for spoiling it.
It's not a spoiler. The film literally opens with anyway.
Because I mean, this isn't a great movie, but you do have a point about this last scene.
No, yeah,
where
that's actually quite fun. That last sequence where he is an agent for the government, and I feel like what should have happened was the first 2/3 of the movie could have been him on the run through small town America, and then the last third should have just been a mission that he was on. That would have been a much more satisfying conclusion with a bigger ramp up. I still think the ultra-violence is fun enough, but it's no Kick-Ass, it's no Kick-Ass 2, it's no Kingsman, it's no Super, it's
Yeah, no, I
fine.
mean, with that kind of movie, you need the tone to be right, and it needs to be consistent. There needs to be good meshing of the different elements of it.
Yeah.
And this movie has an interesting idea, but it's not executed that well.
Exactly. So, moving on to a bigger release of recent times, The Martian. Ridley Scott's return to form, as everyone on Earth seems to be claiming.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just say right out of the gate, yes, it's good. Yes, I enjoyed it, but I will never watch it again, and I would rather watch Prometheus again. Like, Prometheus is objectively a worse movie, but it's more interesting. The Martian is nothing. It is surface, start to finish, which is, apt title. It's just so empty. It's a good, like, action thriller thing, but it's... Would you watch that again? I would. I was getting bored. Like,
I would.
Really?
This is a very good depiction of science in that I love
But
movies
it's a crap sci-fi.
about... It's about competent people using science and being rewarded for it. I like that as opposed to, say, I don't know, like horror movies where stupid people are punished for stupidity. This is it's surprising how this movie it doesn't go too sci-fi route.
It doesn't go sci-fi at all. There's no subtext. It's about nothing.
It's about people cooperating. It's about people using science. It's about someone trying to remain unflappable in a really dark situation. And I think there's a lot going on in terms of, it's not just, you might get the impression looking at the posters or trailers or whatever, that's just Matt Damon on Mars for 2 hours. It's not, because that would get really tiresome. What it does is it shows some of him, then it'll show some of the effort from NASA and different space agencies, having coordinated effort trying to get him back home. And the ensemble works like really well because all the characters are quite funny. There's no there's no antagonist on Earth who's like, oh, it's gonna cost too much money to bring him back, and money is important. There's no kind of added tension like that. There's no
There is something else though, which is very frequent in modern blockbusters, which is the cooperation of the Chinese government.
Which I'm sure is just, complete coincidence, nothing to do with China only releasing 20 Western movies a year.
This version of that particular trope, opposed to, let's say, Iron Man 3 or Transformers 5, 4, 11, whatever,
Yeah.
I thought there was made a lot more sense narratively, and I didn't feel like it beat me over the head with it as much as the likes of the Iron Man 3 alternate scenes did, which aren't even released over here, it doesn't matter. When they did it, I was like, oh, they're going to China for help, that makes sense. No, wait a minute, China for help, modern blockbuster, international funding. The conspiracy kind of blew up in front of me, but it didn't hamper the film, and I do think, I'm not saying it's bad, I really did enjoy it while I was watching it, but it was just so hollow, it was just...
Did you like how it didn't take itself too seriously?
Yes.
Like after Gravity and Interstellar,
Very
not just
balanced.
because space is so awe-inspiring. I think if a director makes a movie set in space, they might get big-headed, try to tackle some big themes. Maybe the fact that this movie does do things in a matter-of-fact way, and it's just about, oh, we need to rescue this person, and it doesn't get too, quote-unquote, deep. And it actually even just in the soundtrack, lots of disco music from Jessica Chastain's character's laptop.
Yeah.
You don't expect to hear that in a space movie. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but it is very fun, very intelligent, and is easily the best movie Ridley Scott has made this decade. Anyway, so
Probably, but his flawed films are more interesting. Like, I love Hannibal, I love Prometheus. Like, neither of those films are like that. Well, no, Hannibal's pretty good. Prometheus is obviously a mess, but it's so much more interesting. There's so much more. There's more ideas in it. I just think The Martian, as a populist piece of cinema making, wank, wank, wank noises, because that's the wrong noise to make. Yeah, fappy noises because I'm making a point here about that.
I think what he's trying to say is that
I may be a pretentious dick, is what I'm saying, but if I see a sci-fi movie, especially when I see all the good reviews, I expect it to have something going on. There is not a subtext in this movie. The film is about nothing. It's about, if you want to push it, it's about, the unbreakable human spirit. And I will say,
it's about science and problem
it's
solving.
not about science, though. Science is merely a plot element. It is not about science.
It's
It
about
has
the
nothing to
process.
say about
It's
science.
about the process of identifying problems and solving them, like systematically, one after another. And I think that's something that given how scientifically illiterate a lot of America is, if we were to judge by its politicians, I think Neil deGrasse Tyson said something funny. He's like, The Martian is science fiction because all the people in important positions of decision-making power are scientifically literate.
Mm-hmm.
It's about you can do things because so many sci-fi movies or movies in general are just about science is bad, you'll discover something and it'll have unintended consequences. Whereas this is a movie about there are unintended consequences, but you can work your way through problems. And I think it worked, all the emotional beats of it and everything, and I'd recommend it. I think I would watch it again, yeah.
I'd recommend it, I would watch it again. I will say it's funny if you're a fan of the television show Community, that Donald Glover is in this movie, and he plays a character who's basically Danny Pooty's character, Abed from Community, which is funny because if you watch Community, they're best friends and using the same manners and transfer.
Would you have preferred if The Martian had some kind of alien skull somewhere, or this was actually going to be part of the Prometheus continuity, or that have ruined it? Because it works so well as a standalone thing, but people were kind of thinking, oh wait, what if this is all a ruse and it's actually just about Alien again?
There were seconds in the movie where I was getting a little bit bored with it, where I was thinking, if this was just a really subtle Mass Effect prequel and they find the ruins of Mars, that would be kind of cool, and then they find that no, they won't. So part of me was thinking that I don't need it to be a big sci-fi thing, but I need to have something in there. It needs to be about something. It's just about nothing. It's a fun action drama thriller or whatever, but it's so hollow. So much. That was so weak.
It's great. Go see it.
I will say though, because we had this discussion before, which I might just quickly have here. Neither of us have seen Everest or The Walk, and I do not want to see either of those movies. But they're also about the unbreakable human spirit. But The Martian makes sense because here's what I hate with The Walk from the trailer: is that there's that one moment in the trailer where Joseph Gordon-Levitt, in his French accent, is saying, "Oh, I do not know if I can walk across the wire when I have to." Say, then don't. No one's making you do this. The Mafia doesn't have a gun to your baby's head saying, walk between the Twin Towers or we will kill them. No, it's him having to do it off his own back and then go, oh, maybe I can't do it.
To inspire people that maybe they can do
what?
the impossible.
No.
So it doesn't have to be specifically doing the stupid thing of walking on a cable at that really dangerous height, but it's just in general, just sort of believe or...
No, nonsense.
I mean, climbing Everest is... we were basically...
Everest is better.
You're basically saying, but that's trying to climb the tallest mountain in the world, that is just an act of ego. It's not like...
No, absolutely.
It's not like, an apartheid movie where you're fighting an unjust cause. It's not like The Martian where you're only in this dangerous situation by accident.
Yeah,
You're kind of talking about...
makes sense because it's him trying to do science and then being by accident and through no force of his own being put in a situation where he has to science the way out of it using his own initiative. That's fine. Everest is then going, let's do this really dangerous thing. Oh no, it's gone wrong. We have to get out of it with our own initiative. But you put yourself in that position. It isn't even a film about the first people to climb Everest. It's just about commercial climbers. So it's even less.
we can't recommend or not recommend Everest and The Walk. We haven't
I've
seen
heard
them,
they're both
but
good. I don't want to see them though.
Yeah, that is an issue, that the triumph of the human spirit, because it is such a worn theme. How do you approach it as a storyteller?
You do the immersion of it. You don't do it with The Walk. We've got to live. Go. Oh no! Make the French legs and walking on the wire. Enough of that before we get sued by France.
The people of France versus the Film Ireland podcast.
Before we move on to Jonathan Victory's Irish Film Corner, which is a segment for today and today only, quickly,
Hopefully recording.
let's do Sicario, which
Ooh, yes.
I think we both really loved. I kind of knew from the trailer going in it should be good, and I love that director whose name I've also forgotten.
Denis Villeneuve. He's some
Those syllables, yes.
Quebec French guy from Canada. Yeah.
If you recall, listeners, I put Enemy down as my film of the year last year because it was, and he's a great director.
That is a great movie. See that. See Enemy.
So it's about cartels. It's basically a Breaking Bad style situation where it's all drugs and stuff, but it's shot and scored and acted and played like a horror movie. I mean, even the opening sequence in the house, we see all those bodies. Like, I laughed at one point. You can look at me, and I wasn't laughing at the body. I was laughing at like how quickly it's escalated into total horror.
It seemed a bit like the TV show Hannibal or something. That's just when I saw the grin on
Something
your
like that,
face.
yeah.
That's just what I thought.
I wasn't expecting that
because it starts off with Emily Blunt as a SWAT cop, I guess, and they discover all these bodies in this house in Arizona. So there's an investigation. There's an investigation anyway that extends across the Mexican border, but she kind of realizes something's not right about it. It works really well because I tend to have a hard time following crime movies because it's all like okay, we've got a shipment coming in and there's going to be crimey stuff happening and this crime person is going to do a crime. Yeah, so I kind of find it hard to follow, but Emily Blunt's character finds it hard to follow even though she's a trained cop, like because it's all murky circumstances. That works really well.
Josh Brolin is fantastic. He's absolutely hilarious.
Benicio del Toro is great as well.
Nice.
This is what season 2 of True Detective could have been. It has such a good vibe, such a good premise, such good topics it's dealing with. I mean, the whole... I mean, just looking at, it's a picture of life in these parts of Mexico where the gang violence, rates gang violence so high, and people just, they just have to listen to the gunshots and then carry on with, the football game they're playing or whatever.
I thought that was a bit glossed over, actually, because that doesn't really come up in the very last shot, which that's not really cool.
Well, I mean, there is a subplot of a Mexican cop and his family, and you're kind of wondering... It felt out of place, and you're wondering, why are they showing this? Until later on in the movie, Benicio del Toro is holding him at gunpoint. And it has more impact that you see he's an actual person instead of just, this is a cop saying, I have a son. That doesn't have as much impact. You see this person as a fully rounded figure. It's like, geez, how many lives are being screwed up by all this violence?
That payoff work, though? Because I was wondering, what is the payoff going to be with this character who we've not seen interact with the main cast yet? And then it comes up, that's it.
Yeah, I think it's more just to... not do the usual thing that they just come out of nowhere. And it's like, he says he has a son, we're supposed to care, but no, we've actually seen the son and we've seen the interaction with it.
I feel like if that was just the only point to it, they spent a lot of time on that character for very little real payoff. But aside from that, I do think it was great. The score is so good.
Very horror
really
score.
Horror,
I mean, it's like
and thumping.
Yeah, a lot of show. Yeah, no, I think this is probably going to be remembered as one of the best of the year as well. I'm hoping it introduces the director to more audiences because before this,
it's more mainstream. Well, Prisoners actually did quite well, I think.
Prisoners and Enemy were his last two films. Go see Sicario. It's good. It is bleak. It will probably depress you a lot, but it is very good. It is great.
It's just all I want really in cinema. It's just more crime dramas shot and scored like horror movies. So, Jonathan, regale us with tales of our land.
We will talk about just, I think, 3 recent Irish movies that have been out in the last few months. Because I'm of the opinion that when John Michael McDonagh said our audiences are wary of Irish movies, I think he had a valid point to make, even if he made the point in an incredibly obnoxious way. We're starting to see more varied output in terms of genre and style from Irish movies, though. So in the last few months, we've had a Western, a crime comedy thriller thing, and we've had an animation that got nominated for an Oscar, and is still in the cinema. You can probably catch a matinee of it. I'm of course talking about Song of the Sea, a fantastic film. It's such a visually creative, really sweet story, told very well. It's as good as anything Studio Ghibli produced. And I just, you really need to catch up on it if you haven't seen it. It's a brilliant film.
I think people will fight you on that one, but okay.
2 other movies then. We have On Klondike. This is very interesting concept for a movie. It is set in Montana along the Klondike River where there was a gold rush during the 1890s, but it is about Irish people immigrating to there and trying to find their fortune. And, it's a different angle on that. We were talking about Slow West on a previous podcast, which was out earlier in the year, showing the kind of historical reality of settlers going out to the West. They would have mostly been immigrants. You see an Irish language community living in Montana. It's and how they interact with the Native Americans and the actual Native Americans who are really underrepresented in general in terms of their history and their story. They're portrayed well in this. there's lots of interesting interactions. It's kind of like Game of Thrones in that there are lots of different characters to follow that are interesting, but horrible things happen to them. Lots of horrible things happen.
Good.
This was basically, it was shown at the Galway Film Festival, so it could be Ireland's entry for the Foreign Language Oscar. That has yet to be decided. Then T.G. Cahir screened it in the hope that it would get commissioned for another series. And I hope it would. It was very interesting. I suppose the main characters are like the Connolly brothers, but that would be a bit like saying the main characters in Game of Thrones are the Starks. You know, there is a lot going on. They have good material with which to make more out of it, and it is an interesting angle in the story, but I mean, there were some problems with this. I mean, the production design is pretty good. They were shooting in Connemara for Montana, but some scenes which are very important to the story and you need to see what's going on are shot very darkly. Like they're set at night or in a mine or something, and you couldn't see what was happening, and I thought that was annoying. Another thing that was annoying is that, like, you know, some of the characters are good, but towards the end it gets quite rushed, because I mean, they're obviously setting up for another season, but you get, like, one of the subplots is involving a pregnancy is resolved in a really, really contrived way, like annoyingly contrived.
Kick downstairs?
No.
Sorry. Keep going.
I'm going to press on, if I may. There's even, like, some of the characters get
Was she
more...
Mary Magdalene? Sorry.
To conclude, some of the characters get very hammy towards the end. There's, like, the main antagonist is this greedy capitalist, and he actually says to someone towards the end, "You know I only care about profit." And I'm just like, you've already demonstrated that through this guy's actions and his other dialogue. You don't need him to be that feckin' on the nose.
People are idiots and need to be handheld.
And, you know, but stuff like that is annoying, especially since they kill off the best character. But on the whole, I think it does... I'd like to give it another shot, because there is good material for more of a season there. So maybe there would be a good TV show out of it. And if, like me, you have an irrational fondness for the Irish language and want to see it used more, if not in daily life, then film and television, then I would say catch up on Klondike. Maybe it's a good stocking filler for Christmas. Another movie of Irish cinema that was out in the cinema last month is Pursuit. This is a modern retelling of the Celtic myth of Diarmid and Grania, but it's set like in gangland sort of crime worlds. Ruth Bradley from the movie Grabbers is to be married to Liam Cunningham from Game of Thrones, but she's a mobster's daughter and she's kind of sick of living in
There are only 4 actors in all of Ireland.
And she runs off with the third one. She holds him at gunpoint in a car and makes him drive out to the country. This is Barry Ward, who is great in Jimmy's Hall. And the two of them drive out to the country, and it's revealed that they had a romantic past and that they are going to run off together. So the mobsters are pursuing them to get her back, hence the pursuit of the title. Now, I knew from the opening scene that this was going to be good. The opening scene is very well shot and very well paced, and the story kicks into gear and moves along quite well. And that was the point that got my attention and made me think, okay, this isn't going to be like a quote-unquote Irish movie. This is going to be an entertaining movie that is set in Ireland. And it is an Irish crime comedy, and there aren't many good ones. But this one, the difference that makes this stand out, take a note, screenwriters, is that the humor is organic. Everything, like, if they're, like, exasperated or panicked or swearing or something, it's because the situation calls for it. It's not because swearing in and of itself is funny. They're all reacting to things that happen in very organic ways, and it's all great until halfway through the movie, they stop at a petrol station, and the guy working in the shop, he's this kind of character who talks like this, and he's quirky, and he's annoying! I was so pissed off when this guy came on screen, because I was just like, no, movie, you were so good at avoiding this. Like, this character is basically, like, every unfunny, annoying shit character you've seen in Irish comedy ever, and he decides to tag along as their wacky sidekick, because he figures that he'd rather take his chances going on an adventure with criminals than staying in his monotonous petrol station job. And every time he was on screen, I was yelling at him to go away. He was so annoying. And it was so disappointing, because the movie was avoiding all the usual pitfalls of Irish cinema that put people off Irish cinema. And then this shows up. Mercifully, about 15 minutes later, he's knocked out and left off at a hospital. And the two characters go off to Spain, where Brendan Gleeson helps them go into hiding. And the movie gets good again. It leads towards an unexpected ending, but I think you would watch it thinking, that was actually a pretty decent, solid film. I just think the middle section is just such a blemish on it because it was doing so well at avoiding the usual pitfalls of Irish cinema. But, you know, I think in general Irish movies are getting better because what I reviewed there was like an okay Irish film with some flaws. There was a good Irish film with one major flaw and a brilliant Irish film with practically no flaws. You know, I think we need to keep supporting Irish films, seeing Irish movies. You know, I think it's coming around. Don't you, Richard?
Well, from that very laboured segue, let us go into Brooklyn, the film we both just saw this morning.
It's a lovely film. Did you not like it?
In summary, to sum up Brooklyn, I think one could just say, escorty, bitches, bitches, bitches. Oh, taking the Lord's name in vain, bitches, green, green, green. Oh, I wanted to die, listeners. I wanted to kill myself and everyone else in that room.
Which
and
only
start
made...
a big fire.
You see, if you're going to see Brooklyn, you need to see it with Richard and see his face contort with disdain and loathing. Because see, I liked it, but I loved it watching it with him. Because like, the more he hates it, the more I love it. Yes, let the hate flow through you.
Where I almost cracked a smile were Julie Walters' performance. Because she's good at what she's trying to do. The material she's given is god-awful. It is Father Ted level caricatured dreck. Problem is, Father Ted was a comedy. This isn't. When you're trying to
it has comedic moments.
No, but the problem is every single character is the same Irish caricature. When she's on the boat, the waiter goes, "Oh, you can't be eating that now, you'd be sick all night, ho ho ho," and off he goes out of the scene. And every single person. And then the pet peeve I couldn't get over was the costume design. Now, I rarely notice that in movies, but every single thing she wore was green. For the entire... No.
Not everything.
No, okay, yeah, she might have had a blue sundress on at one point.
A yellow dress.
Sundress. But for like 90% of the movie, she has this big green overcoat.
A black dress.
That's all you can see. Yeah, but the green overcoat over it. It's like, we're not going to forget that she's Irish film. The accent is beating us over the head with it as if every other secondary character wasn't already. And at one point, she's literally wearing a white blouse, an orange cardigan over that, and then a green coat over that. She's literally walking around New York dressed in green, white, and orange. I was like, oh god, every second of this movie was excruciating. And then we get to the halfway point. I thought we'd been there for like 5 hours at this point. And she goes back to Ireland, and I was thinking to myself, isn't Donald Gleeson in this somewhere? I could have swore I've seen a poster. But I guess he's not. Gets back to Ireland, Donald Gleeson shows up, and immediately my heart sank realising, oh no, we're only in Act 2, there's going to be a love triangle. And there was.
Can I say in defense, I'm really, really sick of love triangles, like especially this variety of like one woman, two guy. If there could be like a one guy, two woman, and all woman, even an all man love triangle at this stage, I would watch just for something different. Like because this thing is so worn now in movies. I think in the defense of Colin Tobin, the writer of the book on which this is based, he wrote this book however many years ago. So maybe it wasn't as much of a thing then, but I think when it does happen, it's kind of, oh, not this again. And what really kind of annoyed me about it is that I kind of... Donald Gleeson doesn't work in this. He's very... Because what happens is, like, Saoirse Ronan, who I don't think can do any wrong at this stage, she really carries this movie. I thought she was brilliant.
The only thing she can't do is do a convincing Irish accent.
She was born in New York, grew up in Carlow, her parents are from Dublin. It's going to be a mishmash. I don't think that's the problem. I think she carries this movie. If she doesn't get an Oscar nomination for this, I'm never giving a shite about the Oscars ever again. They're just
genuinely
nonsense.
Are you joking?
She is fantastic in this.
She's okay, but holy, she's not... What?
Oh, anyway.
Wait,
so she's great.
No, sorry, we'll go back to this. Of all the things this year, this performance, this is what you want to see get an Oscar?
I'm not saying like she'll win the Oscar, but like she should be there in the top 5 that are nominated.
There aren't 5 better performances this year in your mind.
Not that I've seen. No, like there are probably 2 or 3 I've seen that are better, but this is really, really good. Like
your points.
I mean, this movie. Okay, the movie would be nothing without her. You know, she really carries it.
It was nothing with her. She was so boring. Everyone was so boring. No one was a character. Everyone was a character.
Dear listeners, if you're of a persuasion that is distrustful of sentiment of any kind, and you consider any sentiment sentimental.
That's not the problem here.
I think it is the problem with you, because you're a deeply cynical, cold-hearted man.
No,
I think there are people who would love this movie.
Oh yeah, there are.
Because it really strikes a chord with so much about emigration and so on. You must know by now that, you know, it's about girl in 1950s Ireland in Enniscorthy, who, apologies to residents of Enniscorthy, you are not portrayed well in this movie. You stand in for everything that's wrong with conservative Ireland. But so Saoirse
Or
Ronan,
Italy.
or the Italian Americans, yeah. Basically, she goes to America, starts a new life there, but she comes home, and this is when the love triangle with Donald Gleeson comes in, because she already has an Italian American love interest, but she's home, and there's a guy from the local rugby club who, but I'm sorry, I really like Donald Gleeson. I think he's been great in a lot of things. He is not a rugby player ever. He is. Have you seen him?
That occurs
He
to me
is
too.
lank.
I was like, he's a rugby player.
So that's a minor quibble. The bigger problem with Donald Gleeson is that the purpose of this character he plays in this story is supposed to be the kind of like Irish guy who embodies all the opposite qualities of her American boyfriend, and like, oh, is she going to stay home or is she going to go back to Brooklyn? What's she going to do? There isn't any tension in this decision because Donald Gleeson, although he has been good in other things, he is really weird in this. He is either miscast or just the character is just completely wrong for what the purposes of this love triangle is supposed to be, because he's not charming or like alluring at all. He's a mopey, like stiff gombean with no personality, and it just doesn't make sense why there would be any question at all. And
I think her performance was on par with his. I think they're both decent in this. I don't think either of them are Oscar worthy. But I don't get why she's like, the jewel of Ireland the whole time, because she's really bland. She's bland, he's bland. The Italian guy is kind of funny but still bland, has a really annoying, precocious little brother. Everyone's
gets less annoying as he goes on.
Nope. The one thing I'll say in the movie's defense is, when I was on the genuine verge of murdering someone in the vicinity, which probably would have been you, and then it did get kind of funny, because not intentionally, but the movie kind of becomes almost a horror movie when she's back in Ireland, because it seems to imply that small town Ireland is this passive-aggressive hive mind that will constantly conspire to not let you leave. And
yeah, so they're all trying to pressure her into marrying Donald Gleeson's character.
But everyone's like giving like weird, shifty, knowing, smiling glances to one another, like looking at the windows, make sure the plan is going forward. It's really weird and horrible. And
I suppose, like, we weren't alive during 1950s Ireland. I imagine it probably was the shithole depicted in the movie, if the characters are a bit over the top. There are a lot of over the top performances in this. Not too many of them bothered me. There was one girl from Cavan, however she pronounces it. I turned to you and said she's like a Monty Python character.
Which I responded, every single character is like a Father Ted caricature.
I don't know. I think
Julie Walters is not a human being. That was not a character.
It deals with a lot of I suppose this is a really interesting movie to look at in terms of portrayal of Irish people, and just it really does go for the very. I'm trying to think of a better word than stereotype. It's very exaggerated, like personalities of all these different types of Irish people. Look, I think this is probably, it would be a nice movie to watch at Christmas in years to come.
My God.
Yeah, you will love it. I will, yeah. So,
no, you're right. That's it's one of those really boring Christmas movies you leave on the background and go, ugh.
If you've been touched by emigration, there's probably there'll be so many moments that will resonate with you. I think.
Good luck being beaten over the head with the references to it. There is no subtlety. Even I felt about the green thing actually. So she's wearing green coats the entire time, and she also had a bathing suit from Megan Draper from Mad Men. And she's like, no, you can't wear black in your skin tone. Wear the green one, just so people make sure they definitely know you're Irish.
Oh, that's fine. Come on.
No, that was so contrived.
And she wasn't wearing green in every scene. Look,
there were more scenes where she was and she wasn't.
This movie is out on November 6th. It is.
Don't go see it. Burn it to the ground.
It is not for everyone. If you are cold-hearted cynic.
This has nothing to do with that. I went in.
You won't like it.
No,
if you are okay with a bit of sentimentality, I think Saoirse Ronan gives a great performance. There are bits of the movie that are annoying. It doesn't entirely work as a movie, but
it doesn't entirely work as a movie. That's not a recommendation.
I think it's good.
No, I went in thinking in my head, right, this is like on the list of films that aren't for me. This is right near the top. But that doesn't mean I can't appreciate or like it. There is nothing interesting in this movie. The acting was all very serviceable. The directing was flat. The overall cinematography was perfectly adequate, but looked very postcardy and very tourist boardy. And the score, I don't remember the Beam score. Was there score?
Yes, of course there was.
Yeah, there must have been score. And
it works really well in some scenes.
Oh yeah, it was all diddly eye shot, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't.
No, it was. I remember the opening scene was just as she's walking down the
There's a
street to
scene with a
dance.
Sean singer in a homeless shelter and she starts crying. No, that was a great scene.
No, at the moment it was lingering on her face, and they were actually waiting for the tear to roll down her cheek mournfully for Mother Ireland. When the man is singing, I was about to shit myself laughing. That is, if an American movie did that, we would be like, what a pile of patriotic twaddle. But because an Irish film was like, no, it's great, get fucking shit.
Folks, which of us sounds happier? Do you want to be like Richard Drum, or do you want to be like me? Someone who, can,
You're not
see
happy.
how much heart...
I know you in real life. You're not happy at all. I just admit it.
In relation to this movie, I thought it was fine. Richard didn't. You know the score now.
It had very good clock to dialogue continuity. It was a surprising seeing both Megan Draper from Mad Men and Felicity Smoke from Arrow in this film. I don't know why either of them are there. They had tiny scenes. Julie Walters is okay.
So you're kind of lukewarm towards the movie. Is that the impression I'm getting?
Yeah, lukewarm,
Tepid.
moving towards something getting some kind of water that maybe have equal heat, and then burning it alive, killing everyone involved, then myself.
It's really not that bad. It may not be for everyone. It is
It's
not.
sure as hell not Oscar worthy.
Saoirse Ronan is.
Nope.
Well, do we have anything else to discuss, or shall we leave it there?
I can't in
It's lovely.
good conscience say it's the worst film I've seen all year, because Transporter Refueled offended me a lot more. But I would rather watch Hard to Be a God several times on loop again than sit through that dreck for even a second. That frame.
That's unfair. You're going to have to listen to our previous episode where we review a movie called Hard to Be a God to get just the weight of what he just said. That's too far, man.
I think on that note we should end before I break something.
Very well, I'm Jonathan Victory.
And I'm Richard Drum from Enniscorthy. Oh, Irish leprechauns and green.
Slán live, Gachtainna. Slán live.